Praise be to Allah. Today, November 17th, 2019, which corresponds to the 19th of Rabi al-Awwal, 1441 Hijri, the Quran class number 4 will be held. Today's Quran class will also, God willing, consist of an introduction to the Quran, and it is hoped that this will be the final class on the introduction to the Quran. Yesterday there were 40 scholarly points, of which I covered some in the last 3 classes, and we have completed 26 points. Today, inshallah, we will start from scholarly point number 27. Scholarly point number 27 is that, my brothers, there are certain places in the Quran that have been abrogated in terms of their rulings, yet they still remain a part of the Quran. The abrogating verses are also present within the Quran. And Allah Almighty has described this as a quality of the Quran. This is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 106.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ما ننسخ من آيات أو ننسها.
There is no verse that we will abrogate, nor will we cause you to forget it.
نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها.
We will bring forth a better verse than it, or one similar to it.
ألم تعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير.
Allah is all powerful over all things. Do you not know that Allah, the Exalted, is capable of everything? So, within the law, there is also abrogation and abrogated aspects, just as there is a series of abrogation in the old laws and in the Muhammadan law, peace be upon him. In the Mosaic law, many things were prohibited that are permissible in the Muhammadan law, peace be upon him. As stated in the agreed upon hadith of Bukhari and Muslim, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, Allah has granted me 5 characteristics that were not given to anyone before me. The first is that Allah has sent me as a messenger for all of humanity. Previous prophets were sent to specific nations and tribes, but my prophethood is for all of humanity.
وما أرسلناك إلا كافة للناس بشيرا ونذيرا.
In previous communities, there used to be specified places for prayer, whereas Allah has made it easy for my community by making the entire earth a place of prostration. In the Mosaic law, you could not pray everywhere except in designated places of worship, while in this community, you can pray wherever you wish. The third point is that you have mentioned that the spoils of war have been made lawful for me by Allah. In the Quran, it is mentioned that in previous communities, the spoils of war, which were the possessions left by the disbelievers in battle, were brought to an open field where fire would rain down from the sky and turn them to dust. However, for this community, it has been made lawful. Surah Al-Anfal was revealed regarding this. The fourth point you, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, mentioned is that Allah has aided me through a month. That is, if my community is a month's journey away, Allah Almighty will cast a veil over the nations that oppose them. The fifth thing is that Allah Almighty has opened the door of intercession for me and granted me permission for intercession. In Sahih Muslim, there is also a sixth point, that Allah Almighty has concluded the series of prophethood with me. In Sahih Muslim, there is another point, that Allah Almighty has sent me with comprehensive words. There is a series of abrogation between the previous law and this law, and then within the Muhammadan law, peace be upon him, Allah Almighty has changed the rulings according to circumstances. Now, what is the wisdom behind this? It is also a manifestation of our power, that we can change our law at any time. Allah Almighty is not bound by His law. He is only bound by the areas and circumstances for which He has been bound. The universal truths are those that Allah Almighty is bound to forever, because the words of Allah do not change. The rules that Allah has established remain unchanged, but where Allah Himself adjusts things according to time and circumstances. Allah does not change things simply because He could have done so earlier. If He had prohibited alcohol from the beginning, it would have created a hardship for you. Gradually, the prohibition was introduced. Similarly, in the context of abrogation, you will see that initially the will was made obligatory, as mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, where the laws of inheritance had not yet been revealed. Then, in Surah An-Nisa, the complete details were provided and those earlier verses were abrogated. Now Allah has defined the shares of the heirs. The parents will receive a certain amount, the wife will receive a certain amount, and the children will receive their respective shares, as detailed in the second section of Surah An-Nisa. Likewise, in Surah Al-Anfal, it was initially stated that one Muslim is equivalent to 10 disbelievers. Then Allah said, "Now we have seen your weakness. This ratio will no longer apply." There is no fault of Allah in this, as the faith level of new Muslims is not the same as that of the Muslims in Makkah. Therefore, Allah revised it and stated that now one Muslim will be equivalent to 2 disbelievers. It does not mean that he will still be equivalent to 10. The current Muslims are not like those of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Is that clear? So this abrogation is mentioned in the same way in Surah An-Nisa, where Allah Almighty stated that for the adulteress, she should be confined until death comes to her, meaning she should not leave her home for her entire life. The confinement here does not refer to a prison, but rather to being kept within the home. The words indicate that they should be kept in their homes, and then in the same verse, it is mentioned that Allah Almighty will establish a ruling for them in the future, and then the punishment for adultery will be applied. So, there is no doubt about this. Thus, there is a chain of abrogation and abrogated verses in the Quran. A student of the Quran should also be aware that many people have worked on this topic, and some scholars use these points to claim that the Quran is very difficult. They say that there are some abrogated verses in it. If you ask them how many, they may not even know. In total, there are 5 locations, and they are not considered abrogated in the same way, but rather in terms of context. The religion that has been established is the same religion we know. It is important for a Muslim child today to understand that alcohol was once permissible but was later declared forbidden, and the result is known to all. Now, what needs to be extracted from this? It is unnecessary to complicate a matter and put on a scholarly facade. Rather, I would call it scholarly lust. Just as lusts can be related to sexual desires, in Urdu, the term shahawat translates to lusts in Arabic, meaning a craving for something which can take any form. This can also relate to worldly love, as there is a hadith in Muslim that states Allah has covered paradise with hardships and hell with lusts. This means that the pleasurable things of this world lead one towards hell, and to reach paradise, one must overcome the hurdles of the law, which can be painful. This is the scholarly lust that scholars talk about. And in this regard, the book Al-Kabir fi Usul Tafsir by Shah Waliullah Dehlawi discusses 5 points, 3 of which I have already mentioned. This aspect should also be clarified. Scholarly point number 28 is that, my brothers, the Quran, which consists of a total of 114 chapters, as I mentioned at the beginning, begins with
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim
in 113 of those chapters, except for one chapter, which is Surah At-Tawbah. This chapter does not start with Bismillah, but overall, there are 114 instances of Bismillah in the entire Quran, because Surah An-Naml also begins with Bismillah. And in Surah An-Naml, there is also a verse that states,
Innahu min Sulaiman wa innahu Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
when the letter comes to the Queen of Sheba. She says, "This is an honorable letter, and it is from Solomon, and it begins with."
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
So if you count that, there are 114 chapters in the Quran and 114 instances of Bismillah, with 113 at the beginning of the chapters, and one chapter, Surah At-Tawbah, without Bismillah. The absence of Bismillah at the start of Surah At-Tawbah has been explained by many people, and the strongest opinion is that this chapter contains the wrath of Allah upon the polytheists of Arabia, as its beginning is quite aggressive. The announcement of the night of Bara'at indicates that Allah Almighty has expressed His disapproval and His Messenger has conveyed this to the disbelievers. This was during the 23 years of the period of invitation where the call to Islam was made. Now, after 23 years, Allah Almighty is saying that there is no longer any responsibility. There is a 4-month period during which they must either accept Islam or leave the land of Arabia. If they remain in Arabia, they will be killed and the punishment of extermination will come upon them. Just as previous nations faced punishment, such as the people of Noah who faced a flood, the people of Lot who were struck with stones, and the people of Pharaoh who were drowned in the sea, punishment was also to come upon the disbelievers for denying our Prophet. For 23 years they were given respite, but now in Surah At-Tawbah it is stated that the form of punishment will be that the swords of the Muslims will be unleashed upon them. In verse 14 of Surah At-Tawbah, Allah Almighty says that He will punish them with your swords. Thus, in the case of the Prophet of Islam, instead of punishment coming in the form of stones falling from the sky or drowning in the sea, it was imposed through the sword upon the disbelievers. The first instance of this was in the Battle of Badr, and the last instance was in the Battle of Hunain against the polytheists of Arabia. So this is a characteristic of the Prophet, peace be upon him. I have also given a lecture on the issue of 85 regarding the Quran and combat. Our Prophet, peace be upon him, has two distinct characteristics. His miracle is different from those of previous prophets, meaning it is not a partial miracle related to the claim of prophethood, but rather the Quran itself. The punishment is also different. It did not come directly from Allah, but was imposed through combat and the sword. Since this was mentioned, and nowadays disbelievers also quote that there are threats written in the Quran. Those threats are not for today's disbelievers. They are a punishment from Allah for those who did not accept Islam after 23 years. It was Allah's will that they eventually accepted Islam, as Allah opened their hearts to it temporarily. Out of fear, they accepted, and later Allah granted them faith and steadfastness. Therefore, in Surah At-Tawbah, due to the majestic attribute of Allah, there was a strong reprimand regarding the Battle of Tabuk for those companions who showed laziness. This is why it begins without the Bismillah, without the attributes of Allah, the most gracious and the most merciful. This completes the number 114 when the Bismillah is included in Surah Al-Nahl. Scholarly point number 29 is about how many verses are in the wise Quran. It is commonly known in public that there are 6,666 verses in the Quran. However, has anyone ever counted? If we exclude Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which appears at the beginning of the surahs, and only sum the verses that appear within the surahs, the total number of verses in the Quran is 6,236. If we include Bismillah as a verse, then it is evident that Bismillah appears 113 times at the beginning of the surahs. The 114th occurrence is within a surah, so it is already counted in the total. Adding 113 to 6,236 gives us 6,349. Without Bismillah, it would be 6,236 verses. I don't know who popularized the figure of 6,666. In those courses where Islamic studies are taught, it is also written that the Islamic studies teachers say that this is not a difficult task. For me, it is a practice of 1 to 1.5 hours. At the beginning of the surahs, it is written how many verses are in that surah. If you add them up, you will be surprised to find that even those things you thought were at least correct have been incorrectly stated. So why shouldn't we cry? If someone tells the truth, they haven't even accurately stated the number of verses in the Quran, which is 6,236, unless Bismillah is not considered part of it. Bismillah, which is written before Surah Al-Fatiha, is indeed a part of the Quran. There is a disagreement about whether it is the first verse or if it exists without the verse. But there is no disagreement about whether Bismillah is part of the Quran or not. 113 times Bismillah is part of the Quran. However, there is a debate about whether it is a verse or not. But this disagreement does not matter because the Quran still starts with Bismillah and ends with the last verse. Indeed, there are some places in the Quran where there are rare statements suggesting that this verse is not one verse but two verses. It does not make a difference. One can count it as two. What is written in the Mushaf is certainly present, and there is no alteration in it. Scholarly point number 33 states that the surahs in the Quran are generally in pairs. And this is the tradition of Allah, as mentioned in Surah Ad-Dariyat, that Allah created creatures in pairs. A pair, as you know, is a reciprocal relationship. There is male and female. However, these two come together to achieve a common purpose. For instance, through the union of male and female, Allah initiated the lineage of offspring. This issue of genders also exists among animals and even within plants. Both are imperfect without each other and become perfect together. Similarly, in the Quran, the chapters are also in pairs, achieving a perfect purpose together. The most prominent example of this is Surah Al-Falaq and Surah An-Nas. These two are also a pair. Surah Al-Falaq deals with the attacks of the devils that come from outside in the form of magic and envy. You can see,
قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ.
I seek refuge from the evil of everything you have created.
وَمِنْ شَرِّ النَّفَّاثَاتِ فِي الْعُقَدِ وَمِنْ شَرِّ حَاسِدٍ إِذَا حَسَدَ.
This refers to the harm caused by those who practice magic and the envy of the envious. Envy does not mean causing physical harm to someone. Rather, it implies a negative influence. Surah Al-Baqarah is paired with Surah Al-Imran. Surah Al-Baqarah addresses the previous Muslim community. But which community is that? It refers to the Jews, while Surah Al-Imran deals with a previous community of Muslims, the Christians, Nasara. Together, these two move towards a perfection. Surah Al-Najm and Surah Al-Qamar are also paired. The moon and the star are indeed paired. You see, even on that flag, this Quran is in pairs. And sometimes you will find similar verses presented in different forms as pairs. This is a unique topic, and its discovery is being presented in the community for the first time by Hamiduddin Farahi. May Allah have mercy on him, who is also a teacher of both Ghamidi and Dr. Israr. Amin Ahsan Islahi was his teacher. Now, look at this. This is something that has not been revealed in this way to the Muslims over the past 1300 years, although there were hints present in Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, and Ibn Majah regarding the two protective surahs. Similarly, there is a hadith in Sahih Muslim that Surah Al-Imran and Surah Al-Baqarah will provide shade like two birds on the Day of Judgment. So the hints were there, but no one had thought that these are indeed pairs. Then they have a purpose, and it forms a complete doctrine. And this person did an extraordinary thing. He spent 40 years of his life in a tent in a completely desert area, in the same conditions and circumstances in which the Quran was revealed, so that he could understand the culture of the Arab people and feel their emotions. Then Allah opened up certain things to him. Today, in this regard, the organization of the Quran is referred to as its structure, and he is considered its leader, even though he is not an ancient elder. He passed away just about 100 years ago. Dr. Israr has also spoken in detail about this in his lectures on the introduction to the Quran, where he has honestly mentioned his name and has not attributed this discovery to himself. It would be a great dishonesty to label someone else's discovery as your own and start selling it. I have also been honest in this regard because this is not my discovery. So no one should say that Ali Bhai has done something remarkable. Whatever has been done should be attributed to its rightful source. May Allah forgive his mistakes and grant him the ability to do good deeds. Ameen. Scholarly point number 31 is, my brothers, if we analyze the Quran, it can be seen that there are a total of 7 stages. that were established during the time of the companions of the Prophet, may Allah be pleased with them. It was established during their time that the Quran would be completed in 7 days. There is a hadith in Tirmidhi stating that whoever finishes the Quran in less than 3 days has not fulfilled its rights. This is said to those who know Arabic and claim that our elders complete the Quran in one night. What reward do they earn? Understand that the companions were advised not to complete the Quran in less than 3 days. So the companions would complete the Quran in 3 days or within 7 days. For the 7 days, they set their stages. The term stages is also used in the books of the elders regarding their spiritual practices, where they mention that there are certain stages to achieve in Sufism. This concept was established during the time of the companions, where it was determined that one should complete the Quran in 7 days. They divided it almost equally, though not perfectly. And since this was the practice of the companions, you will not find the same flaws that appear in the division of the sections of the Quran, which I will discuss in the next point. If you consider Surah Al-Fatiha as the preface of the Quran, then it is evident that within the first section there are 3 surahs. In the second there are 5. In the third there are 7. In the fourth there are 9. In the fifth there are 11. And in the sixth there are 13. Look at how beautifully it is structured. And in the 7th section, there are 65 surahs, which is also a multiple of 13. If you multiply 13 by 5, you get 65. This division was done by the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and this division almost creates equal parts with the Quran. If someone wants to complete the Quran in a week, and if they start on a Saturday, they will complete the first section by Sunday. And by continuing this way, they will finish the Quran by Friday. This is the sequence of sections.